Hey guys, this is AI Gaming 1776, and this is my first live commentary with gameplay, so I'm pretty excited about that. What we're going to be looking at today is Far Cry 4, and I'm going to be talking to you about how I try to optimize it. GTX 970. It's an EVGA, it's a super clock, and right now it's on somewhat stock settings. I changed the GPU temperature limit because I'm going to be pushing the card, and I think it throttles. What I did was I increased the heat limit, but I didn't increase the clock or anything because while I can overclock this card a little bit, and remember it's a super clock, it's a third party card, it's already overclocked to start with. I can overclock it a little bit more in a lot of games that I play, but I can't do it with the Far Cry games. So, and I'm not saying that to criticize Far Cry. I love the games. I know people love to bag on Ubisoft, but in my opinion, Far Cry is not Watch Dogs. It is not the last Assassin's Creed. So I have it on this screen real quick because I have music turned off, and yet I still hear music. So go figure. I'm trying to not get a copyright claim because I put a lot of work into this. I've been trying to get all my ducks in a row for these settings. So in the upper left hand corner, you have a fraps counter. It's at 260 frames per second because we're in a menu. And then over in the right hand corner, up there with the green letters and numbers, that is MSI Afterburner. The GPU temperature is at 74 degrees Celsius. The memory underneath that, it says MEM. It's using 2400 megabytes of VRAM. Now at the bottom of all this it says RAM. That's my system RAM for my computer, and it'll go up as high as like 5 gigs probably through the playthrough. And then in between I have a 4-core with hyper-threading, so those are my 8 CPUs and the percents that are being used. So let's go over to video and look. I'm playing at 1980 by 1920 by 1080. I have a 60 hertz monitor. It's a 1080p monitor. 60 frames per second works just. I have custom quality settings. I don't like the ultra settings, the ultra preset, to be honest with you. Even if I had, Titans and SLI or whatever, I still do not like the ultra preset. So I turn motion blur off. I turn textures to ultra. Just so you know, if you have a weaker graphics card like a GTX 960, or the one I used to have was a GTX 750 Ti, I say turn textures on ultra. Like, definitely do that. Even if everything else has to be like low or medium, if there's one setting that gives you the most bang for the buck, it's definitely putting the textures on ultra. That's my personal opinion. I think it goes pretty far. Just to give you an idea real quick, what it does is the textures in particular affect you, NPCs, so like your hands, your arms, the skin for NPCs, their weapons, your weapon, your vehicle. So like when you're flying in the buzzer, like, well, even when you approach the buzzer to start with, the seat looks better, the joystick looks better, like the buzzer just is more pleasant to look at when the textures are on. And I would say that even if you have like a 750 Ti and you turn everything else down on low, about 30% of anything you look at any given time will be pleasant to look at. So textures on ultra, shadow on very high. I prefer NVIDIA soft shadows, but the problem is there was an update in February that broke soft shadows. So even with the GTX 980, I was getting 40 frames per second. I didn't realize it was because of the soft shadows. I had to go on Steam, and it was in the forum. So, well, someone else figured it out. So, but it worked. It worked. So that was good. And by the way, like, if you're like polite with everybody and talk to people on the Steam forums, and you're having trouble getting your games to work, someone will usually help you. It's been a nice experience so far. So anyway, shadow on very high. If you put the shadow on ultra, no, that's actually another setting. So yeah, shadow on very high, post effects on ultra, geometry on very high. It could go higher, I suppose, but I think the game looks fine the way it is. Vegetation on high, you don't have to have vegetation any higher than this to look good, especially if you're only running one GTX 970. And if you were running a 750 Ti, I would say put vegetation on medium. Even on ultra, it's still not always perfect, but the cliff sides look pretty rough. Uh, Anything under ultra, and they kind of like put you in this position because look, you have ultra, you have high, so there's no very high, and then you have medium, and then you have low. Okay, so it's another one that doesn't give you medium. So this, but still, there's no very high. So it's either ultra or high, and a lot of times I don't think the terrain looks very good anyway. So definitely ultra for terrain. Now water you can do low. It's still going to look pretty good. Now if you're swimming underwater, it seems like it does affect it a little bit. It is a little bit ugly when you're swimming underwater. I don't swim underwater a lot, so I can get by. Believe it or not, even again, if you have a GTX 980, by the way, I overclocked my GTX 980 quite a bit. Like that was a good overclocker. This card right here, for whatever reason, uh, doesn't hold a stable overclock. My GTX 980 did. Anyway, so this is the GTX 970. I put water on low because even when that is on ultra, even when it's on very high or medium, it all that really affects most of the time is reflections in the water. And yeah, if you have it on ultra, you can get really nice reflections in the water, but I don't care. I'd rather have the frame rate. So I have water on low. I have environment on high because if you, this is the one I was getting confused with earlier. So environment, I have it on high because your options are high, ultra, or high, low. There is no medium. There is no very high. So you get low, you get high, or you get ultra. Low, high, ultra. So if you do low, you're gonna have a lot of pop in because that's what environment affects in this game. If you go to GeForce.com, Nvidia's website, they will actually tell you what a lot of these settings actually do, and it's in great detail. It took me a long time to read it. It's a pretty long read. It's very thorough. So environment on high, because if you have it on ultra, this game has pop in no matter what. And even when I see people, they're running two GTX 980s and SLI, they still have pop in. So they're going to have pop in no matter what. And in my opinion, the pop in on ultra is actually pretty distracting when you're flying around in the buzzer because it's like the trees and the horizon are constantly popping in. Whereas when you have it on high, trees that are closer to you are popping in. But if you're flying across the map, you're not necessarily looking directly under your buzzer, if that makes sense. Either way, you're going to have pop in. You can adjust this to whatever bugs you or doesn't bug you, but I will tell you that ultra does eat up some frames per second. So ambient occlusion, actually, this HBAO plus it looks pretty good, and it doesn't seem to really tank the frame rate. So I stick with that. And then the whole reason I made this video to start with is anti-aliasing. So I'll get back to that in a minute. I leave God rays off. I don't think they look good. That's just my opinion, and I'm sure it probably affects frames per second. You can try it. Your mileage. Fur, I have it on simulated because off looks like a plastic toy, like a really bad plastic toy, and then on is okay and simulated is okay. That's a personal preference. Up to 30 frames per second, and well, the console peasant. So anyway, I'm going to show you like a stable 60 frames per second with VSync on. is what you're shooting for, especially with this being an open world game. When this game is stable, rock solid, 60 frames per second VSync, you can jump, you can climb things, you can swing your weapon around, you can do 360 no scopes or whatever, and the game doesn't even stutter. And it actually feels really good. I like the engine in this game. I think it's enjoyable to play this game. So, anyway, so let's get to this anti-aliasing. The truth of the matter is, and I'm going to be hardcore honest with you, is if you have all of these other settings popped up, which I don't really like them to go any lower than what they are, then unfortunately, like performance isn't free. So anti-aliasing is kind of what you have to take the hit on. So if you want to just click the video off now, I can give you the cheat notes and tell you the game is okay with anti-aliasing off, and with all these other settings on a GTX 970, and I have obviously I have a Core i7 processor. It has hyper-threading. It's 4 cores, 8 CPUs. But with this setup, which is not an extravagant setup, anti-aliasing off, looks good, rock solid 60 frames per second, feels good, looks good, but it looks video gamey, in my opinion, but it looks good and it feels good. MSAA2 looks good. It kind of gives it a Disney Pixar look, if you will, once you start using anti-aliasing. This will not be a solid 60 frames per second, though. Like, maybe if you give something up on these other settings, it will. But one GTX 970, that is not a solid 60 frames per second right there. Okay? Just telling you. Now, this right here is darn near 30 frames per second once you go to MSAA4. It's going to say, if you look at the corner, it's going to look like you're getting 40 frames per second on average. Maybe even 45. But it feels like crap. But when you stand still, it is beautiful. I honestly think MSAA4 is beautiful. MSAA8, I don't even bother because I can't run MSAA4. And I'm going to tell you this. This is what I've noticed about graphics cards. If you bite off more than you can chew, if you choose too high of a setting, it actually looks worse. Like, you think like, okay, I'm getting 30 frames per second and I'm running MSAA8, if I even was. I don't know how many frames a second. Like I said, I haven't tried it. But a lot of people tell themselves, like, oh, I'm running it. Well, no, you're better off down here. Like, that's going to actually look better. Because whatever you can run at closest to 60 frames per second is going to look better. Even if you can run that MSAA8, and even if it's so-called playable, and you can play the whole game, and you can beat the game on that setting, and you're getting like 24 frames per second on average, or 27, or whatever it is you'll get. I'll test it out. I'll see how many frames per second I get. I'll try it out. But if you do, it's actually going to look better way over here. Hell, it'll look better off. And Far Cry 4 and Tomb Raider, these demanding games, I'm telling you right now, there is a difference between 30 frames per second and 60 frames per second. It's huge. And you are better off sacrificing somewhere else, sacrificing somewhere to get you to that 60 frames per second. You're just better off. So let's keep it moving. SMAA is actually not bad performance wise. I wouldn't call it a rock solid 60 frames per second with VSync on. But why do I keep saying VSync on? I'm going to tell you. Because this game has all kinds of screen tearing. Okay, even if you're getting like 76 frames per second with VSync off, screen tearing is out of control in this game. And it affects it. It's not very enjoyable. So anyway, and if you have a FreeSync monitor, then you have so much more headroom to play with. But that's a topic for another video. If you do have a FreeSync monitor, then some of these things I'm going to talk about aren't going to be as useful to you. Alright, so let's keep it moving. TXAA2. I don't think it looks very good. I can get almost 60 frames per second running this. It's in the 50s. It doesn't feel like 60 frames per second. Now, there's some games where you can get like 50, 52 frames per second and it still feels like 60 frames per second, but not this game. So, I don't quite get 60 frames per second with TXAA2. And I don't think it looks as good as MSAA2, in my opinion. And then TXAA4, I get like 30 frames per second. Don't think it looks that good. All right, so MSA A2, that's realistic. And I'm sorry for keeping you in the menu for so long. I really am. How about that? So you're going to see right off the bat, this actually looks pretty good, but there is screen tearing. The screen tore a little bit just now. I'm having to barely move the controller. Watch. If I go fast, tear, 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 shimmy, 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 tear. It's more in the middle. Um, I have it. I have VSync off right now though to show you the raw frame rate without it capped to give you a better idea. So no, I think it's beautiful. I think these settings are absolutely beautiful. I've played this game with integrated graphics. I've played it with a 750 Ti, a GTX 980, a GTX 970, a GTX 745 OEM card that came with the computer. Okay, I have played this game in so many configure and on Xbox One, and I think this is just beautiful because things pop. The woodwork on the wall pops. Those blue panels in the window, they're sunken back in. You can tell that that's metal rods across them. Oh, another thing is, well, let's just get out here. You've seen a safe house before, and I'm probably losing you. But the door, even right, the door has so much going for it. It's got deep red, but then it's got wear and tear on it, and then where it's got the artwork on it, it looks like it actually is paint on top of it cracking. Now remember, you're watching this on YouTube at best at 30 frames per second, and then it's got artifacts and all that, so you're not going to see this like you will in real life. But I'm telling you, like, this is gorgeous. The lighting is really pleasant to look at. The boxes pop, like everything is nice. So let's go to my spot. I'm going to take you guys to my special place that I go to work on my settings for the game. Okay, it's a place that I go when I want to check out the settings. Now, anti-aliasing is on, textures are on ultra, we're above 60 frames per second, and the buzzer just pops. And it has character, and that looks like a real exhaust system, and that looks like real metal. The motor's a little bit chintzy, but the air cleaner looks good. The seats with anti-aliasing on and ultra textures, it looks like vinyl. Not only does it look like vinyl, it looks like used vinyl that's been sat in. And it's got like the wear and tear and the discoloration. And now if you turn AA off, the straps actually have more pop to them. So here's what I like. I like 60 frames per second, and I like my graphics to pop. So now you know. If you notice, we're only using about 2.5 gigs of VRAM. This is a GTX 970, so it's got that issue where, it has 4 gigabytes of VRAM, but it doesn't have 4 gigabytes of VRAM. But the game doesn't ever call on the 3.5 or the 4, or however you want to count it. So that's pretty good. It just went up to 2.7 gigs, but still almost 2.8. But still, there's still headroom. Now, like I said, I played with I didn't change the clock on this card, but I did change some of the temperature rules. The priority, this card can get as hot as 98 degrees according to NVIDIA. So I told it to go ahead and go up to 88 degrees, but it won't, because I also turned the fan on, and I had the fan on like 40%. Because 40% is enough to keep this graphics card in the low 70s for temperature no matter what I do. And then not be too loud. And if you're going to play a demanding game, then yeah, you got to start thinking about what you're going to do with temperature and fans and all that. Now, most games that I play, like Titanfall or Dying Light or any number of games, I don't have to think about the fan or temperature or anything because they don't push the card. They just don't. So I go over here to this brick factory. And I like this place a lot for checking out my settings. And I'll show you why. First of all, depending on what your settings are... Oh yeah, you're going to see all kinds of screen tearing. Depending on what your settings are, these bricks can look like you're actually walking on a pile of bricks, or they can look like just a hot mess of polygons. Now, no matter what you're doing, no matter what graphics card I've used, what settings I've used, there are like the black flickering things that you can do stuff to change that. Now, when the sun comes up, oh, I also like being up here because you can see. Look at the barrel of the gun. You can see reflections on it. See that? There's like the white mountain reflections and sunlight. Because you're up here, there's no real shade. You know, it's like the hot sun beating down on a bunch of bricks up here. So you get to spin around and see how light dances off your weapons. Um, Now with AA off, I feel like the guns kind of look their best. It's kind of complicated, right? With AA off, I feel like you can see more details. Like if you look at the silencer on this AK, you can kind of tell that in the back there's little round holes, and you can definitely tell there's dimples in the front of that silencer. But when you turn AA off, it's a little more obvious. It's little things like that while I'm playing the game that I like. You know, what do you see most of the time? You see your weapon in your hand. So you go over here, see that? See the back of the silencer? You can totally see. I'm pointing at it, which is stupid because you can't see me point. But you can totally see the back of that silencer. There's all those round holes. There's dimples in the front, and I like that. Now you can also tell that there's jaggies on that red dot right now. But most of the time you're swinging it around, it doesn't matter. I'm actually surprised that the frame rate is so low because I turned anti-aliasing off. It usually goes up to like 120 right now. You still get a lot of light bouncing off of your weapon. See how the sun bathes it and like drenches in sunlight. And you spin like I'm gonna go left and right. You can see, look towards the back. You can see the light just gliding left and right across the top. It's beautiful. And then when you swing over here, depending on how the light hits it, the accessories and little details and nooks and crannies on the side become more evident. Right now you can see the wood at the front of the gun. It has like little pits in it. The wood is pitted because it's obviously an old weapon. And then, you know, they kind of jimmy rigged the red dot sight on here, so you can see the little red strap involved in that. That's what that thing is on the left side there, is to get a rail on top of the gun. You have to put the that little bracket on, and you can see all those little details, and it's not. Now I feel like some of those details kind of disappear. Everything's about trade-offs. Now, even though some of those details disappear, which I love those details, you do get, like, even the terrain becomes more rock-like. You see, I don't know, it's more authentic to me. And even the grass is like bushier grass up there. Like, a lot of people say that AA is only affecting the jaggies, and I strongly disagree. I've noticed a lot of games seem to put extra layers of polish and filtering on their world. So you can see these bricks. One of the reasons why this is a good place to check out your AA, two reasons: one for jaggies, two for filtering, is you can see on these bricks that, like, the texture is really nice. Like, it pops. And then obviously there's like all the lines, the cracks are more pronounced. So let's turn AA off. Alright, so now we got it off. You can see the texture's different. They're more washed out now. They're more washed out now. And the lines, in my opinion, they're there. I mean, it's not like they turned invisible, but they don't pop as much. Like, I don't think this pops as much. It doesn't look ugly. It's not unplayable. It's not trash by any means. But I think AA, especially when you go to MSAA 4, I think it just makes it more pleasant to look at. Oop, a little bit washed out, coming back. So now I don't think the black lines are super pronounced, but I do think it looks good. Now here's one thing about MSAA 4. And if you saw this in real life and on a 60 frames per second monitor in real life and 60 frames per second, you would see that now it actually looks in front of you immediately, it looks more convincing that you're walking on bricks. But also notice how standing still, I'm only getting 54 frames per second. And then when I try to move, it usually goes down into the 30s. It's being on good behavior right now. It's staying in the 50s. That it normally does not stay in the 50s. Now, another thing that looks really good is in a distance, those piles of bricks look much better on MSA4.
I don't understand.
Like, there's so much, like, you can tell there's so much more polish on them, and there's shimmer, and it doesn't just look like, okay, without it on this setting, it normally to me looks like it's drawn, like I'm supposed to know it's a bunch of bricks or whatever. And while I don't necessarily think the authenticity has been upped any, I don't think it necessarily I don't think it looks like bricks per se. It looks good. It doesn't look generic. So let's see if I can engage some enemies, see what that does to the frame rate. And like I said, it's being on good behavior right now. It normally is really bad. Alright, that just went into the 40s. Wow, that dude ragdolled pretty hard. Oh, you got a sniper. Really? Did not explode. There we go. Back into the 40s again. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I'm just trying to search him. Now, we just went up to 76 frames per second for no good reason. I don't know why. Another enemy coming? Oh yeah, been meaning to do this. Some C4 over here.
Fire! Fire!
Hey, you need to get out of the way, buddy. Because I'm going to blow that out. I don't like to kill civilians. Hell, no one might even come now. So when you look at this with AA on, it see these cargo tie downs here? Those look like real cargo tie downs. So without AA on, you can tell that they're drawn on there, and you're supposed to think that they're tie downs or whatever. They really look like tie downs at 60 frames per second with AA on. All right, they look. I mean, they look legit.
Who needs more money?
And then on top of that, you can tell this little bed liner here looks like vinyl, looks like plastic. And then over here, this pops, this little cable that would be probably holding the tailgate if there still was a tailgate. I mean, it really adds to the situation. However, like I said, we're at 60 frames per second standing still. And normally when I'm running around playing, there's usually more screen tearing than this, although there just was some. Look at that. Those bricks are beautiful there. Again, this is MSA A4, and just everything just pops, and it looks really nice. Now, if you can overclock your GTX 970 and you can keep a stable overclock, you could just about pull this off. If you had a GTX 980, you could do this. It wouldn't even be a problem. You really wouldn't have to go. There we go. Just went into the 40s from rotating. So one thing you can do is you can start climbing. If you start sprinting, climbing, jumping, spinning, you can start seeing the screen tearing. You can see the frame rate go down. We're not even in a firefight or anything right now. We're just moving around at a brisk pace. Although it's being on good behavior. I promise you, it would normally be in the 30s right now. So I go over here at night to do this test so that you can see as the sunlight gets harsher and harsher. So before we lose daylight, let us try TXA, see how that plays. Normally TXA2, not that great. It doesn't look that good to me, and it doesn't perform that well. Although again, I'm jumping around and keeping 60 frames per second, and it's making me look like a liar. And the screen tearing, not that bad actually. It normally does not play this well. And that's another thing. When people test graphics cards and they try to give you advice, a lot of times they put a game in a test, they put a graphics card in a test bench, play a certain number of game modes for a certain number of minutes, and they don't tell you what it's like to live with the card, and that's what I'm trying to do. I've been living with this card for a couple months, and I'm trying to share that experience. So this actually doesn't look and perform that badly. Let's see if we put on VSync though. This actually, I have 60 frames per second and it doesn't look bad. So I look like a liar right now. Oh, if you have like tiger camo, that's real good. Because on some settings it's real washed out and on others it's really bold. Here it's kind of in the middle. It's a little bit of both. Now this isn't bad. It's like generic AA to me. It's I feel like the MSAA looked better. This looks a little more natural. So I think some people might like that because it looks more natural and it's holding 60 frames per second. It's actually not doing that bad. But I'm telling you, it normally does not do this well for me. Now, I still think things look washed out. Like, I think the bricks look washed out. I don't think the black lines between them are as noted. Matter of fact, everything looks more natural. Okay, with the MSAA2, there were thick black lines separating them, and I like the look. I like the aesthetic of it. This actually looks more like real bricks in a stack. This looks much more natural. And again, if the more natural look is your thing, then maybe, what do they call this again? I think it's FXAA, TXAA. TXAA2, it's actually looking pretty natural. It's staying at 60 frames per second on VSync. This is actually playing much better than it usually does. It's usually around 52 frames per second right now. So, this is not bad. Let's switch it off real quick. Let's switch AA off. Look at the difference. Now, here's where it looks more video gamey. Oh yeah, let's turn off VSync. It definitely looks more like a video game with AA off. At the same time though, I love it. I'm geeking out. Like right now, I'm looking at this weapon. It's a boring, neutral colored AK, and I'm geeking out because I am looking at the strap on top. You know, right behind that red dot sight. I'm looking at that strap. I'm looking at the rail, and the rail is like popping right now. And I'm looking at if you look at the back of the weapon towards you, like right up against you, on my computer screen right now, again, because I'm seeing this in person on a 60 frame per second monitor, where on YouTube you have compression and artifacting and all those things getting in your way. But I'm looking at this and you can see the weapon is faded. It looks like a used gun. It looks like you've picked up a used gun. It looks great. We're around 90 frames per second. What's interesting is a lot of times with AA off, this card can go to 120, but it won't hold 120. And remember, a lot of the settings are on ultra, they're on high, they're on very high. So another thing I like, by the way, in this game is if your settings are really like dialed in, then the little paw prints above the animals, they pop too. Remember, I'm all about 60 frames per second. I'm all about popping. Okay? I love it when the stuff pops. And if you look over here, it actually, the brick... Okay, so the bricks shimmy a little bit, but on my screen, when I look at these bricks with no AA on, it looks generic. It looks like those bricks over there are just drawn on. There's no real depth or texture. There's a little bit. But it's very, very generic. It gets the job done, don't get me wrong, but it's not immersive. Now, without AA, we're back to having black lines in between these bricks, but they're not as pronounced as when I had the MSA 2 on. Alright, now one thing I like about AA off that I've noticed is there's a lot more contrast. That's why you can see so much. Like if you look right here at the AK again, you can see the silencer. You can see those round holes in the back of the silencer. You can see the dimples in the front of the silencer. You can see the bracket holding the rail on, but you can also see like the whatever the manufacturer is of that rail. You can see their logo. Like there's so much contrast. And then if you look at the watch on AJ's wrist, you can see every single little notch in the watch face. Like there's just so much contrast. I'm a sucker for contrast. I'm a sucker for the pop. Now, if you look at this right here, I mean, it looks okay. There's nothing wrong with it. But once you go with AA, like 4, Now, when you walk up on it, see, now we're in the 40s. That's more realistic. When you walk up on something like this thing looks real. Okay, I'm telling you right now, this thing looks real. Like, I've seen these in real life. This has so much character to it, so much texture. So if you can keep a stable overclock, or you got a pair of 970s, or if you have a GTX 980, you can run MSA A4. And I think MSA A4, if I had the horsepower to do it, that's what I would leave on, to be honest with you. This is the AA I would run. So anyway, let's turn VSync on and see what this is going to hold. I'm gonna really get it going. I'm gonna jump and climb, spin around. Like I said, this right now I'm getting better performance than normal. I don't want to be that guy. Like, if you're thinking about buying a 970, or if you're thinking about buying Far Cry 4, or if you already have a 970 and you have Far Cry 4, I don't want to set you up for failure. I don't want to tell you that you can expect to keep right around 50 frames per second, because normally you cannot. It actually doesn't even feel that bad right now. It doesn't feel that laggy. And normal, I played this earlier. I made a video like this earlier. I was practicing the different settings, and it was chugging all over the place. Even at 52 frames per second, it still felt really terrible. Right now, it does not feel bad. Like, this is playable by any definition of the word playable. Like, you could get into a firefight right now. The controls aren't gonna get in your way. So let me show you one more spot. If you just want prettiness, I feel like down here, the Kyra T terraces. So when you start the game, you're over there. That's where you start the game. And if you go to the Kyra T terraces, I feel like this is a really pretty area to like soak in the visuals. And we're keeping around 60 frames per second. This is ridiculous.
Oi, hit the brakes!
Yeah, hit the brakes. Great idea. I forget what the shotgun's called. I don't know if it tells you. The 87. Love this shotgun. It's a signature weapon. You can actually get it pretty easily. And down goes Frazier. Alright. Wow. That explosion went off. It still stayed in the high 50s. Really?
This time.
I didn't even really hit that guy. Not real. But when you walk through them, they're beautiful. There's so much contrast. There is so much pop, and it always goes back to contrast and pop. Like, you walk through here, and the green and the purple is just beautiful. And then you have the terrain actually looking good. And then you have the mountains and the trees in the distance. It's just so much eye candy. It's not the fanciest thing in the world, but to me it's very pleasing. Now, again, I normally do not play with this level of AA. I normally play with MSA A2, or I just turn it off completely. So now it's a little more washed out right now, but it actually, I feel, because see how it's staying at 60 frames per second? It looks better because of that alone, okay? Like, do I notice that the little text, the little layer, the little effects layer is not as pretty? Yeah, I noticed that. But the fact that I'm keeping 60 frames per second makes it so much more beautiful. And I love the engine in this game. The mountains directly in front of me right there. Those, again, 60 frames per second, they look like a watercolor painting, okay? And then this is a little ratty looking right here. That does not look so great. But this grass is so, because again we have the AA on, this grass is so nice and bushy and lush, and you can tell. Remember, I only have the vegetation on high. It's not even on very high or ultra, but there's so much contrast, and you can tell that you have different lengths of grass that you're walking through, shorter grass and taller grass and different thickness of grass. And then you got your bushes, and there's different kinds of bushes. There's like whatever this little brown business is, but there's so, like, a lot of people say that Far Cry 4 is just Far Cry 3 in a different location, and that's not the truth. I mean, there's a lot of similarities. You know, some sound effects carry over, a lot of animations carry over, a lot of weapons carry over. Yeah, a lot of things carry over. But I'm telling you, Far Cry 3, I didn't feel like it had a lot of variety. Don't get me wrong, it was beautiful. Far Cry 3, which, by the way, the GTX 970 will play it on ultra settings pretty well. It's a gorgeous game. In some ways, it even looks better than this. But there's so much variety. I'm looking at all these different bushes and types of grass and plants in front of me, but then I can also see the different color trees up there and the different, like, there's just so much going on. Like when I walked right here, the 3D popping effects in this game, something as simple as like this plank, the way the engine renders things, something as simple as that plank is just beautiful. I'm walking. I know you guys are probably bored to death with this video because it's like, why is this guy excited about a plank? But I'm telling you, you're walking, you're going through, you got the grass, you got the rocks, and then you see the way that wood is rendered. And again, in real life, 60 frames per second, it has lots of contrast, it has lots of pop. See, what they do, they very smartly mix it up with this flat, boring looking crap right in front of me. This isn't popping at all. This looks like texture mapping from the PlayStation 2 era. I mean, it looks better than PlayStation 2, but this is not popping at all. And what they do is they give you some of this little flat, not so pretty stuff, and they juxtaposition it with, you know, a plank that pops. And then I told you about how, you know, the flowers and the grass play nicely together, and it just pays off. It pays dividends. And then don't forget your weapon. Your weapon is beautiful. Now, I have, you know, like, boring weapons. I have the boring AK. I did at least get the white launcher. It's a little washed out, but you can tell, like, the fabric going across the top of that. That's got some pop, and there's some ridges. And the way the game renders, it kind of shimmies while it moves. It looks really nice. Here, let's put the paw print over these guys. You know what it looks like, the paw print over the animals, when you have everything popping right? It looks like, you ever go to the Disney store and you can buy animation cells from the movies? It looks like an animation cell. Like, this game brings me pleasure. It takes me to a happy spot to just walk through the mundane parts of it. And then if you've played this game, you know there's actually some really pretty set pieces too. But even when you're not dealing with the set pieces, the game still ropes me in. I like it. Now, one thing that's good about the Predator, and they actually have this weapon in Far Cry 3 also, is the red crosshair. For whatever reason, I don't know if it's a placebo effect or what, but the red crosshair seems to be really easy to aim with. I'm trying to think if I should get in any action. This video is 43 minutes long right now. So if you've watched it this long, I mean, you've given up almost an hour of your life. Please don't give me a thumbs down now that I've pointed that out. Actually, I would appreciate a thumbs up. My channel is new, and a lot of my videos, no one puts a thumb up or down. But what happens is, if somebody, for whatever reason, and I'm not saying, like, you know, if you don't like the video, you don't like the video. But I had a guy troll me. He went to like 3 different videos, and in every video he said troll stuff to me, and he gave it a thumbs down. Well, that's the only rating those videos have, is the thumbs down. So it does help if you do a thumbs up, and I appreciate that. Like right now, like the rock faces just have that nice grain to them, and the trees are popping. But remember, I'm getting 60 frames per second right now, and I normally, even walking around, do not get 60 frames per second with all of my effects in AA on. Now, it might be because I've been playing with the temperature threshold on this card, so it won't throttle. Because remember, it's staying at 72 degrees. I saw it go up to 73. It's staying in the low 70s, and I have it set to go all the way to 88. So I think that maybe when the card's not throttling, you actually might be able to keep 60 frames per second. Remember, guys, this is something that you have to play with. That's, when you're in PC gaming, you have to tinker and figure out what does it take. But don't settle for less than 60 frames per second. Don't, okay? You are part of the PC master species. I'm not going to call it the master race. You're part of the PC master species, and it is your birthright to have 60 frames per second. And do not settle for anything less than 60 frames per second. And you play with your settings, and you figure it out. You know what I'm saying? Like, you figure it out. You figure out how to get your 60 frames per second. Because a lot of times, even low settings at 60 frames per second looks better than medium settings at 30 frames per second. I like looking at the Sherpas in this game. Check this out. If you have your settings right, if you're at 60 frames per second, oh, here, let me take these guys out.
This is crazy.
If you have, hey, Sherpa, he's a scaredy cat. So, if you have your frame rate at 60 frames per second, and if you have your textures on ultra and your geometries on at least high, then something as simple as the Sherpa, when your settings are not looking good, when soft shadows was broken and I didn't realize it was broken, the Sherpa doesn't look as good. The Sherpa is one of my tests. Okay, the Sherpa actually, come here, dude. The Sherpa has a lot going for him. All right, the fur ring around his hat looks like real fur. All right, his wicker basket looks like real wicker if he would stand still. So then, like, all this stuff on him pops and is layered and looks 3D when you're at 60 frames per second. When you have all your settings dialed in, even the Sherpa is impressive to look at. Whereas he just looks like a flat, generic drawing of a thing when it's not dialed in.
New things to show you.
When Soft Shadows was broken, even with a GTX 980 and it was going to 40 frames per second, the Sherpa just looked generic. There was nothing, it was like, whatever, he serves a purpose, but there was nothing to it. Whereas now, that little red thing going across him diagonally, that looks good, it pops. His fur looks good, it pops. His skin looks good. He looks like a real person. So, the point is, the GTX 970 can make this game look absolutely outstanding. Even if I had AA off, alright? Because a lot of times, if your card throttles, if something's being shady, a lot of times you have to give up AA. You get to keep all this other good stuff, but you have to give up AA. Even with AA off, let's go back to the Sherpa. Even with AA off, the Sherpa actually still looks good with AA off. Everything still pops on him.
Oh no!
His skin still looks good. All this stuff still pops. It doesn't pop as much as it does with AA on. But your GTX 970, even when your card's throttling or whatever, you can still have these high settings, and you can still have an outstanding gaming experience. You can still play 1080p, 60 frames per second, locked on VSync. Let's turn VSync off. Look, we're at 82 frames per second. If you had a G-Sync monitor, you'd be just kicking it right now because you wouldn't have screen tear to deal with. I mean, the game pops. It's beautiful. This is a almost 50-minute video, so I'm gonna cut it off now. I apologize for going long, but I'm passionate about the game. Ooh. I was afraid I might hurt that elephant. I was afraid. I don't like hurting the animals or the people. See, look, you can see the way the sun glints off the undercarriage of this truck. Look at that. It is beautiful. The sun shines even on like the bottom of the vehicle. It's gorgeous. Anyway, this has been AI Gaming 1877. I'm going to show you these settings one more time. Si se puede. Yes, you can. Yes, we can. Have a great Far Cry 4 experience on a GTX 970. Oh my God, we are actually at 3.3 gigabytes of VRAM right now. All right, but don't be scared. Don't be scared. I know there is that 4 gigabyte of VRAM scandal. I know. But you know what, man? A lot of people have gone back since that scandal broke, and they said, yeah, it sucks that NVIDIA misportrayed or misrepresented or was, just honestly not super truthful in how much VRAM you can expect in your card. That sucks. But the fact remains, this game is awesome. This card is awesome to game. Let's look one more time. This has been AI Gaming 1776. The channel is AI Politics 2. My website is ai-everything.com. And if you've been listening for the 50 minutes, please give me the thumbs up. Please let me know you like this video. And I have this graphics card. I have a lot of games. Check this out. Because I am trying to share my experience with you guys. I'm going to quit to the desktop. I got all these games. If you got questions about these games, they're over here to the left. If you got questions about these games, let me know. And I will help you out. Thanks for watching. And y'all have a great day.